if the Russians also had this weapon. And he said, I wanted to tell you about it now before we get married because you might want to drop out. I didn't want to.
The book Bombshell came out in 1997, 25 years ago, but the follow-up is still overshadowed by the justice of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. When did this story come across your point of view, and what spurred you to follow up and make the documentary?
One of the people we interviewed, one of the journalists we interviewed for ABACUS, a guy named Dave Lindorf. He's a, he's a real student of this time in world history, and he wrote some piece that appeared online that Joan Hall, Ted's wife, widow, saw, and she reached out to him and she thanked him for the piece and introduced herself to him. And so he followed up with her, and he was like, oh my God, this this woman's amazing, and it's an amazing story. So he reached out to Mark Mitten, who was the producer on ABACUS, and then myself, and said, I think there's a film here if you guys are interested. So in looking into it, I just thought, wow, that's really interesting. And this is kind of typical of the way I sometimes get started with films, is I made a commitment to go to Cambridge, UK, and spend a few days with Joan and interview her, with the understanding that depending on how that went and how I felt about it, maybe I'll pursue a film of it. And once I got there and met her and heard her tell, she's such a great storyteller.
Yeah,
and then when she shared with us that there are these tapes of Ted before he died talking about it all, then I was like, okay, we're doing this. And it's not like I've had a desire to do a story about this. I was really more just taken with the kind of amazing person she was, the amazing thing he did, and the fact that it's a part of American history that too few Americans really have a real understanding or awareness of.
What is extraordinary about Ted Hall's story is that, in essence, he got away with it along with his friend Seville Sachs, and the government bureaucracy literally tied their hands on the follow-up. There are reasons given in the film, but why is the U.S. government, in your research and observation, so selective in scapegoating certain people over others?
Well, I think they wanted Ted, and the problem with getting Ted was their only evidence, and I could do a better job of this, frankly, in the film, to explain this. It's in there, but I don't think it's really ultimately satisfyingly explained. Their only real hard evidence were the Venona documents, the Venona code that they broke, and that's how they found out about Ted. And as the FBI agent who later became a judge told one of the authors of Bombshell, he didn't think once he became a judge that those documents would have been admissible in court. So they really needed something more than that. They knew what he did, but they needed him to have talked about it. They needed to find something that would really tie him, or they needed him to confess, and he wasn't willing to confess, obviously. It's interesting, this isn't in the film, but Carl Fuchs, who was also a spy at Los Alamos, independent of Ted, they didn't know about each other. They did the same thing with Carl Fuchs, and he broke and confessed, and that's how they caught him, essentially. And so, Ted was just extremely cool and careful, and because of that, they never got enough evidence to really bring it against him, but they would have loved to have convicted him. Now, Ted talks about, and I think there's some real truth to this. There's no way to prove it at this point, but Ted talks about the fact that his brother, who was such a primary part of the Air Force missile program and was a key developer of the ICBM missiles, you can't make this stuff up. They clearly went to him to try to see if they could pressure him to get Ted to get information. And he basically said, no way. And, Ted and Joan speculate in the film that they were probably reluctant to pursue Ted unless they had a really clear ironclad case, because it would have been embarrassing for the government to say that the brother of their prime missile engineer was a Soviet spy. That would have been very destabilizing news, I think, for the government to have to deal with.
Yeah, very, very good. I haven't seen your entire filmography, but is this the first time you've done extensive historical recreation by actors?
Yes,
Okay.
first time,
All right.
absolutely. And it was kind of fun to do something different,
Oh, yeah. What did you want to be careful about in recreating events that took place 70 years ago, so that the fashion or cars or locations were not a distraction to the real story?
Yeah, well, we did this on a budget, but I'm pleased with how they turned out. I think our DP did a phenomenal job. Our production designer, we had our DP is New York based, but everyone else involved with the reenactments was Chicago people, which was great. And we did it on a budget, but we put the money up on the screen, as they say, and I think we picked really good locations that could fit. We didn't have much in the car budget, so you don't see many cars, but they're expensive.
Oh, I can imagine.
But I think the key beyond just sort of trying to get the look right, the key was to try and make sure that when you watch them, you believe not you're not going to be fooled. Obviously, they're recreations, but that you believe that they are recreating real things, that we're not taking serious poetic license with what happened. And that's why it was important, I think, for me to kind of always remind you through Joan's voiceover, Ted's voiceover, that what you're watching on the screen really did happen. We're not taking poetic license, because I want you to believe the truth of them, even though they are recreations. That office that was Ted's office there, where they lay on the floor, that very well could have been his exact office. He was on that floor of that Cart Hall.
Wow.
We don't know exactly which room he was in, but from the way Joan described it with the architecture, it very well could have been the exact same room that he was in.
Joan Hall is one of those great behind-the-scenes American who has lived long enough to be discovered by you to tell her story. In a personal sense, what was your feeling toward Joan, and what really surprised you once she revealed what she revealed?
Well, I adore Joan. I mean, I when we were interviewing her, she was 91 and 92. She's now pushing 94. Wow. First and foremost, I was just remarkably taken with the fact that she could recall so vividly and cinematically what happened. She's such a great storyteller that she's one of those people that, yeah, it's a talking head interview film in a lot of ways, but for me, it's like I could sit there and watch her speak. And it's one of the reasons why I put her on camera as much as I did, because I just feel like she's so expressive, she's so passionate, and she's so sharp. I mean, this is a woman who is very engaged in the world that we live in today, not just what happened in the past. And I love that about her. And I love putting someone like that in front of audiences. And then her love for Ted, her sort of, to me, a big part of wanting to tell this story was the love story between Ted and Joan, and to try and show sort of this, this absolutely incredible period of history in which Ted did this incredible thing, incredibly brave thing. Whether you support it or not, it was brave. And to sort of see that what got them through it all was their profound love for one another, was really kind of lovely and inspiring and poignant for me.
This is Patrick McDonald for HollywoodChicago.com. Copyright 2022.